welcome to this webinar, AI in Learning Curation. We're very fortunate. These three leaders have experience across AI, platforms, and learning. David James Clarke IV, David, is the Chief Digital Officer at Toolwire. Stephen Walsh is the co-founder at Anders Pink. And Alex Feltus is the co-founder of the Praxis Institute and also a professor at Clemson University.
Thank you very much, Peyton, and thanks everybody for joining. Delighted to be part of the session here today. Hope you can hear me loud and clear. Here is co-founder of Anders Pink, working with our great partners at Toolwire and with Alex to take you through our thoughts on content curation and the role of AI in helping to scale that. So, of course, like any good interactive session, we're not going to let you sit back. We're going to ask you some questions because we really want you to get involved and throw questions and comments at us. Here's the first question. We're about to talk a lot about content curation and what automation means within it. Where are you on the journey towards that? Are you not even discussing this? And I'll include in answer one, I don't even know what this is. That's why I'm at the webinar. That's a perfectly legitimate answer. You may already be doing something manual about curating content, bringing outside content from the web into your learning experiences and platform. You may know that you should be doing it in an automated, more scaled way, but haven't started. You may be trying it in a small pocket of your organizations or with a small group, or you may be right at the fully deployed, actively using it level. So we'd love to hear from your perspective on a scale of 1 to 5. And if you want to vote now, we'll take a look at the poll. We'd love to get your thoughts. Give you just 30 seconds to fire in your votes there. While we're doing that, what is AI-powered content curation? Well, we're going to get on and define that. In a nutshell, it's about bringing in outside content from the external web in an organized way and using technology, AI algorithms to help to scale that to make it easier for you, if that maybe helps you to position your answer to the question. But we will dig into that in a lot more detail.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm going to give everybody a few more seconds to vote. We've had votes from just about everybody.
Right.
If you haven't voted, please do so now. And I'll go ahead and now share the results.
That's great.
It's interesting distribution, Stephen.
It sure is, and I'm gonna try and do a live control group study. So I asked this same question in Learning Live, which was an event in London just this time last week, and saw some very similar patterns. I have to say. So I won't put on a data scientist hat and do some exact control group mapping, but similar distribution of answers. So great to see that in the middle, people recognize the benefits of it, but haven't got started yet. I think that's probably confirmation bias. That may be why you're here, to find out how to get started with it. And interesting that 20% of you are manually curating content, which of course is a great way to get started. I think what we're going to try and help you recognize and realize today is the ability to go beyond that, ability to use technology to help you scale that. Great to see some pilots already underway, and for those who aren't discussing it yet, well, we're going to discuss it for the next hour. Well, let's keep those figures in mind, and let's talk a little bit about why this matters and how to get started with it. So, really, two very tightly related concepts here: continuous learning and curation. And again, referring back to the session at Learning Live in London last week, all the attendees who are all learning leaders in their organizations were asked, what are your top 5 priorities for 2019-2020 when it comes to learning? One of the key ones was enabling a self-directed learning culture with curation, which is really playing to this question. So why does continuous learning matter, and what has curation got to do with it? And David, if you move the slides on, we'll explore that. Well, one reason is the way in which we have traditionally approached learning, from school, from university, into corporate and organizational life, has traditionally been, as you all know, using the unit of currency of the course, whether that's a short course or a blended program. That's typically been the stock and trade of delivering learning within organizations, not exclusively, but for the vast majority of occurrences. The challenge with that is it's just not enough anymore. It's not enough anymore because things change, and you don't need me to tell you that. One example here from the telephony industry is AT&T. AT&T, who used to have the IP for the telephone, the patent on the telephone, found themselves falling behind. Their CEO, Randall Stevenson, pointed to this and couched it, I think, really interesting from a learning perspective. He said, this is not a competence problem, it's a learning problem. It is about us not staying up to date. His mandate, which is perhaps a little draconian, but you can see where he's coming from, making this point that if we don't invest 5 to 10 hours a week, each and every one of us at AT&T, staying on top of the fire hose of new information, we will be managing decline in 3 years. I think his choice of words is interesting there. It's not going to courses, it's not informal learning, it's staying on top of the fire hose, which I think is something that no matter what industry, what walk of life we're in, we're always challenged with that. There's always new information relevant to our fields of interest or our passions or our domains. And it's about tapping into it to making sure that we stay relevant, we stay competitive, we stay employable, and we stay competent. And looking at this on a macro level, thank you, David. It's not just AT&T. It is across the board. And you may have seen stats like this. Your mileage may vary depending on which sources you read. This is from a book called Exponential Organizations, which is a great read, albeit a sobering one, making these points that business competencies, what we learn, what we understand, their value they're an asset. They depreciate over time if we don't top them up and we don't continue to invest in our continuous learning. From 1984, when it was a competency that you had was going to be relevant for the next 30 years, today it is now less than 5. And I think what the stat I've seen is if you're working in technology or in data, it's probably more like 18 months. So what you've learned now, 18 months time, a whole new set of information is going to be relevant. And you see that at the macro scale of what that's meant for the Fortune 500 list, massive change from 1955 to today. So even there's a lot of hype about we should fear AI and we should fear machine learning and the bots taking our jobs. I'm more afraid of us as humans not continuously learning, not continuing to invest in ourselves and stay up to date. And Mitchell, I noticed your quote there. We love Clay Shirky. We're big fans of his work, and you're absolutely right. This is about filter failure because, and it's a lovely segue into what we want to talk to next, which is yes, that information is out there, but we have to organize it. We can't just open the fire hose and then all drown. It's about letting the right content come into us in the spirit of that Clay Shirky quote. So Dave, if you can move us forward. There's many CEOs and business leaders who echo the sentiment that Randall Stevens expressed there. Sitting down at Microsoft saying something very similar. They are not interested in hiring experts. If you know something, great. They're more interested in hiring learn-it-alls, people who have predisposed to say, I want to continue to learn and grow and take on board new information. And down at Google, they may disagree on many things between Microsoft and Google, but they do agree on this point. Eric Schmidt has said there, we hunt for learning animals. Our key skill is learnability. It's not how well you can code. It's not how much you understand SEO. It's your learnability. Which I think is a great, if we need new buzzwords in this industry, learnability, adaptability, those are the key ones for driving forward that continuous culture. So if we're on board with that, and every time I speak to learning professionals, I get the privilege to do it all the time. The answer I get is, we get it. We want to do that. We want to provide continuous learning in our organization, but it's not easy. It's not easy to do that. And I want to acknowledge that, and I want to point out some of the things that I've heard people say, and I'm backed up by some of the data that we've seen about what makes this difficult, and then look at how we can simplify this. So what is so hard about shifting to a continuous learning model, opening up that fire hose, letting people learn whatever they want to learn? Well, there are a couple of challenges. So David, let's maybe have a look at a couple of those. These are challenges which are probably synonymous with every challenge we face as learning and education professionals: time and budget. So we all want to do it. There's no lack of will about creating a continuous learning culture. But if we're saying, okay, well, we need to provide every single individual in the organization with the content that they specifically need to further their skills, develop, do their jobs better, that's going to be a big ask of us in L&D if we have to create that from scratch, or if we have to buy it or build it. So time and budget, as always, are against us. And even if we're just saying, okay, well, let's curate that content. Let's go out to the web, find the very best and most relevant content. If you think about scaling that across a 10,000 or 100,000 person organization with different regions, different interests, different skill sets, that's a big time ask as well if you are doing that manually. So I think for the audience members who said we are doing this manually at the moment, my guess is, and it'd be great to get your comments and feedback on this, is if you're trying to do that on scale, and you're trying to do that every day or even every couple of days, that becomes a big engine. That becomes a big task to do. So this is where I think we need to think about how do we release some time and budget pressure on ourselves, and how do we start to bring automation into this. So time and budget, two big challenges. The other challenge I think we have is back to this point about formal learning and what our learners actually want. So David, if you can just move us forward here, a couple of stats around this. Finding external content is high value, and that's backed up by data. So this is from Towards Maturity, their global benchmark report, where they ask people what value they see in different forms of learning. 60% of learners saying, I get more out of external sources than I do courses. 70% saying external web sources are essential, very useful, versus 47% free learning. So we know there's an appetite for it. We know people see value in it, but it takes time. That this stat from IDC has been around for a couple of years. If anything, I imagine it's worse right now with the number of things that come at us every day, but we all invest a huge amount of time looking for information. If you just think, how your day goes, how easy it is to get distracted, go down a rabbit hole around specific types of content. We need to do better around this. Some more recent data, if you could move this on, David, to back this up, is from another survey that was done just around this time last year by Jane Hart. Again, asking learners directly. And what I really like about this one is it's not mediated through organizations' view of what their learners want. It's asking learners directly, what do you place the most value in? There's a couple of clusters in here which I think are interesting to look at. Top 5 there, of course, learning on the job, daily working experience, absolutely essential, the highest rated form of learning. But then knowledge sharing with your team, web search, networks, communities, web resources. There's a cluster around those that are all about external content effectively shared in the right place at the right time. So those things are really highly ranked by learners, the ability to consume external content and collaborate on it. At the bottom of the list, the things that they place less value on: classroom training, conferences, and e-learning. Not to say that they are not important, of course they are, but I think it's important for us to bear in mind when we think about how we approach continuous learning, that we are skewing towards the top of this list in terms of what we provide and curate for people, and away from the bottom of this list. So just think about mixing the offer, bringing more of that external content in. So David, if you can move us forward then, and then great to get some conversation going around this. So what has curation got to do with this? You're in the session today where we've said we're going to talk about curation. What do we mean? I could curate any number of definitions, no pun intended, but here's one that I think really works for me from Rohit Bhargava, where he talks about curation being about finding, grouping, organizing, and sharing the most relevant content, relevant being a key word in there on a specific issue. The other key word, I think, in his definition, as he says himself, is continually doing that, or continuously, depending on which side of the pond you're on. It is not a one-time thing. It is not about going out to the web and finding 8 pieces of content and then leaving it for 6 months. As we know, millions of pieces of content are published and shared every day. It is about consistently doing that, continually doing it to bring in the most relevant content over time. So it's looking outside, organizing that content, bringing it into the workflow, wherever the right place that is for your learners. Someone else who's written a great amount on this, and David, we can have a look at this model to help people maybe think about this and how to do it on scale. Harold Jarkey, who I'm sure some of you have read and heard of, great Canadian writer on knowledge management. And I've talked to him about this model, and he's a big fan of thinking about it with a curation lens. Is 3 words, and maybe 3 words. If you can take these away today as a framework for thinking about curation, I think it could be useful to hold in the mind: seek, sense, and share. So seek is about who are you serving, who is the audience that you need to bring in content for. I know, looking across everyone who's joined today, there's going to be a diverse set of audiences, probably some highly technical people working inside your organizations. You will have leaders, of course. You will have client-facing people in sales roles, and you'll have everything else in between. Each of them will have a different need and a different appetite for what type of external content they want to see, what they place value in, what's relevant for them. Understanding them, being what some people call a content concierge for them, saying to them, what is it we can bring to you to help you stay up to date? What particular topics you're interested in? What particular sites and sources do you highly rate or highly trust that you would be happy to get signals from? Are there particular ones you don't want to see? Asking those questions. Once you've got that information, then it is about using tools. So this is where the AI, the humans and the machines work together. You don't have to go out and find this content manually. You don't have to go to 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 different websites to find it. That's what technology can do for you. And David's going to show you in just a few moments how that works in practice. But the tools, the aggregation tools, like Anders Bink and like Anders Bink inside Toolwire, enable you to do that at scale. So that's the ability to automate that. At the core, sense making. Then this is where you bring the humanity. Where's the humanity? It's right in the middle of this model. Curating is a human act powered by technology, in my view, and it would be great to have a debate about that. Only humans can make sense of a piece of content. Only humans can say, this piece is interesting because of what we talked about last week, or because it relates to this thing that we are examining right now in our organization. That contextualizing is a personal activity that all of us can do as curators, all of us can do as experts and people passionate about our own fields. And this is where it can be a really collaborative activity, involving the subject matter experts in your organization, getting them to contribute their thoughts, curating their insights, and building collective intelligence about it. So that's the sense-making activity. And then the sharing it is obviously putting it in the right place. So making sure that the feed of content, that curated feed of content that you're organizing and you're adding value to, is getting traction inside your organization. So that might be inside your LXP, your LMS, but don't also forget about these other places where people hang out, where they might be working in Slack or Microsoft Teams or other collaborative platforms like that. You can bring that content in there as well. Software has been eating the world since Mark Andreessen said it a few years ago. APIs are really eating the world now. So the ability to plug one platform into another so that you're getting content in the right place at the right time, that's the key to helping this automation work. So you don't have to be cutting and pasting or uploading content. It's just flowing for you. And that's what APIs and plugins do. And then, as we said, it's a continual activity. You want to be asking people, what do you think of this? They can send you signals, they can vote for content, recommend, like, and share it. We're all familiar with those tools for sending signals about what we see value in, and then refining it over time, bringing in more of the content that people are interested in, retiring sites and sources that they're not interested in, and then building that habit over time. We've a client right now who said, what I want to do is get to a continuous learning culture where learning is something that people can do in 5 minutes. If you've got 5 minutes to spare and you want to read a piece of content, watch a video, that is learning. And what we want to do is make sure that there is always relevant learning constantly coming into the organization to do that through scale and through using APIs. So seek, sense, share is a way to think about it. And that is a little bit of background, a little bit of thinking around it. What I would love to do now is hand over to David to show us how it works in practice. And do keep on asking questions as ever you want to. And we'll
yes, please. Definitely try and make this as interactive as possible. Thank you, Stephen. That was very, very helpful. And as you talked about the 3 S's, seek, share, and sense, I'll be talking about 2 more S's, which are scale and speed.
Excellent.
So, you talked about humans being at the center of it. The human definitely plays a role here, both the learner and the curator. So I'm going to walk through a 5-step model of how we're applying these concepts and technologies to automating a lot of this curation, and how over time it can get better and better. The key point is it's a crawl, walk, run kind of strategy, and we're in the crawl phase right now. But I think seeing how we're doing it, and then in the third part of the webinar, Professor Feltus will share a real-world example of what a program that he's put it into and how the students are reacting. So in step 1, you need to turn on AI curation. So you're basically activating it at the learning path. And so the important thing about about curation at this level is that it's relevant to some sort of skill or some sort of learning path. So in this case, the learner is studying cloud computing. In the case of Professor Feltus, it's computational biology, but there's some sort of subject matter that you need content for. And the system in step 2 is going to then scour trusted sources. One of the tenets of this model is that the strength of the system is dictated by the weakest piece of content. So if in fact you're surveying resources that aren't very relevant to the learners, or the sources aren't trusted, you could end up with fake news instead of knowledge. And so this is a very important role for the curator, the human, is to identify what are those trusted sources: blogs, libraries of videos, websites, etc., Twitter feeds, or even proprietary IP repositories inside of companies. I mean, anything can be a trusted source, but you want to limit, especially initially, the sandbox that the curation bot is working in. Once you do that and you identify the subject matter and the keywords, the system kind of takes over and starts to feed personalized and prioritized content into the learner's environment, the learning experience platform, the API, as you just spoke about, Stephen, in that share concept. One of the most important elements of step 3 is making sure that it's personalized to each learner. So each learner has a unique set of skills that he or she needs to learn. They have learning styles. The content itself needs to be not only personalized, but prioritized specifically for their needs. So there's a whole filtering process that occurs once the content is elevated into the environment. And that's part of step 3 and this concept we call My Skills. But the idea is the content comes in, the content is then personalized and then delivered to the learner. For me, all of this up until step 4 is pretty straightforward. It's automation. We're using machines, but there's not a lot of machine learning. There's not a lot of AI. That happens in 4 and 5. And I think, if there's anything I've learned in all of my studies of machine learning over the last X number of years is that the power of the system is relational to the size of the data. So the larger your data set, the more powerful your AI. And so this is where crowdsourcing can be so helpful and so powerful. And this is the second of the 2 touch points for the humans in the system. In the first case, identifying trusted sources, that's the curator side. Now we're on the learner side. So the more learners you get involved in the system, the more learners are engaging with the content and starting to generate that big data lake, the more accurate your curation becomes. So this is obviously a self-serving positive loop. The kinds of data that we capture on these resources are things like efficacy. So we can build correlations between the use of specific resources and assessment outcomes. Ratings, learners will rate the resources on a 1 to 5 scale. They can make comments about them. They can like and share specific resources. So there's some algorithms around, if somebody shares a resource, then that is an even greater referral than a like, for example. And then skill score. We can weight the data from people who are doing better, potentially more so than people who are struggling. So there's all sorts of really interesting data that we can accumulate across the entire population about the usage of those resources, which then feed a machine learning algorithm. And that machine learning algorithm starts to prioritize the resources and elevate them into what we call the carousel. And I'll show you that in just a moment. But kind of like when you go to Netflix, there's that carousel across the screen, and there's a recommendation carousel, which is constantly updated with the shows and movies that Netflix, through machine learning, has determined are the most relevant, for you. And so we can do the same with learning. The system might return 20 or 30 different pieces of content for a specific skill, but really the best 3 or 4 are ultimately elevated into the carousel. So the learner is constantly focusing on only the best content. And that's done, again, through this prioritization and personalization process. And that's where the loop is closed. That's the positive loop, right? So the more crowdsourced data that we capture about the usage of the resources, the better the prioritization and personalization algorithms, which then are continually, there's another word that Stephen used, continually updating the carousel so that the content changes, and it can change on a daily, weekly, whatever basis you feel comfortable with. I think in Professor Feltus's course, the content is changing whenever it's the data determines that a better piece of content has come along, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And there's always the option, again, for human intervention. If Professor Feltus sees a piece of content come into the carousel that is really valuable, and he doesn't want to lose that content, he can promote or convert that content to a kind of standard static resource. So it leaves the AI pool and becomes kind of a standard piece of the environment. It doesn't change at that point. So there's always this idea that, wow, this piece is fantastic. I don't want to lose it. I don't want the system to replace it with something better. So I'm going to convert that to a standard resource. So as we talk about the role of machines and of humans in this model, again, the human curator is important on step 2. The learning resource, the learners themselves and all of their data is important on step 4. It brings up a really great debate that's ongoing, human versus machine, and the role of humans and machines, kind of in learning and in curation. I think, Alex and I, and we'll be chatting in just a moment, our kind of ultimate dream is that we can build a course that is self-sustaining, something that, will continually update and evolve over time along with the learners and along with the technology. And that kind of nirvana implies that there's very little human interaction once it's been set up. Other people might not be, as comfortable with, a learning system that is self-sufficient in that way. So I'm going to jump to a poll, but before I do, I saw a few chat questions. Peyton, were there any that you think would be relevant to discuss right now?
No questions that popped out, but it sounds like the audience is echoing many of the sentiments that you and Stephen have pointed out.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. So where are you on the spectrum of human versus machine for AI content curation? This is always a fun one. Let me go ahead and launch the poll. So, kind of in the first step, curation is a human thing. It's too important to trust to robots. I think, everybody should be, manually curating content. That's the job of the instructional designer. And in fact, the only person who really knows what is valuable for learners is the, trained instructional designer. Number 2, humans are in charge. So, the robots can help with the grunt work, but, again, the humans are doing the important work. It's a 50-50 relationship. And then now we start to move towards the right side of the spectrum a little bit. Humans can configure the environment and let AI take over from there. And that's a little bit of what kind of I described here in the kind of crawl and walk stages. Ultimately, in the in the run stage, the bots can do it all. I mean, in the sense that we, in effect, it'd be kind of between 4 and 5 there, where we're going to set it up, and then the system becomes self-sufficient. And computational biology, we picked that topic because it's so so technical and so quickly changing that for learnability, we talk about, the textbooks are obsolete before they're written. So really the only way to keep that course current is, to automate in a way a lot of it. And so we'll see that example in a moment. Okay, so I'm gonna give you another couple minutes or seconds. I think everybody's just about voted. So I will end the poll here, and let's share the results. So right kind of in the middle, I think this is interesting, a tie between the 50-50 relationship and 3 and 4 there, the humans configure the environment, AI takes over from there. I think that's a little bit of what I described. Again, the the system is only as good as the way it's set up and the size of the data lake. And so, you know, as these programs get larger, they get smarter. And I kind of like, you know, that we had 5 people on number 2 there, not, you know, 29% saying, look, humans are in charge, bots can do the grunt work, but, you know, stay out of the kitchen. Stephen, Alex, do you have any comments about this?
It's great to see the humanity staying in there, for sure. Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting clustering around 2, 3, and 4. I think it's exactly we've both been expressing is we want to use technology to help humans and help learning professionals scale more effectively, and I think that's what technology is for. So yeah, I'm on the side of the humans powered by the bots for sure.
Terrific. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you, and let's move on to Alex's section, and a real life example of this. And I think, you know, we're picking the Praxis Institute and biotechnology, you know, as one of many industries that are reinventing themselves every month. And Alex is doing something really exciting down at Clemson to solve, you know, this problem. And it's not just biotechnology. The Praxis Institute, kind of their mantra, their mission is to harness AI and data to solve some pretty big domain science issues in biotechnology, energy, climate, financial markets, psychology, whatever it is. In this first iteration, we're tackling computational biology, and he has a program running right now at Clemson with 25 honors and graduate students in it, which we're going to show you in just a moment, that uses this AI-powered curation and this concept of promoting the best resources into a carousel and having that carousel deliver required resources to the learner, because there is no textbook. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about the program, Alex, and the textbook, the future textbook?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay? Because my mic wasn't so good earlier.
Yeah, we hear you great. Thank you.
Awesome. So yeah, so this, for a little perspective, so I'm at a university with about 23,000 students, and everybody I know does manual curation of their content, right, when they're teaching classes. And it used to be that you'd have a textbook that somebody else manually created, and that would last for years. In my case, I was surprised by the slide earlier about the 5 years versus 18 months in tech fields where things go and stale. It's definitely less than a year for me in my field. And so what I've been trying to do is be able to keep up with my class. Actually, let me stop for a second. So I teach a class called bioinformatics, which is using computers to look at biological data. And I've taught this for 12 years. And I had a textbook twice during this period because they just published a textbook and it was pretty good. And then it was gone after the next year. I had to go completely textbook free to be able to curate my own content. And so I'm at a place now where I know how to find stuff pretty quickly to reboot once a year for my class. But to really do it right, I need to be able to do things much more quickly than I have the time to do. And that's sort of a little bit of the motivation behind the Praxis Institute.
Yeah, and I think the thing for me then, and thank you, Alex, is, you know, I've known Alex for, I don't know, less than a year, but one of the things that impressed me the most about our conversation, some of our early conversations, is I didn't realize, but if you take a look at all of these problems, biotechnology, energy, et cetera, financial, these are data problems now. And they're not, you know, biotechnology, the entire genome has been mapped. It's been mapped for many years. And so in order for us to solve some of these big kind of, you know, cancer-oriented problems, et cetera, it's now a kind of Linux, Python, you know, big data, exadata sets, data-intensive computing kind of problem. They're not, these biologists and geneticists are not working in the lab anymore. They're working in the cloud. And so let me just jump to the next slide, which is a picture of the course. So these are the skills now that a modern biologist or researcher, you know, requires, and a lot of them are about using data intensive computational environments. And like you said, I mean, it's not, it's a little bit about biology, but it's more about data, right?
Yeah, so like in my lab, so I mean, I do mostly do research, and I sort of kind of teach on the side, really. But what we do is we're processing over 20,000 human genomes of people with autism spectrum disorder or their relatives who are unaffected. We're looking at, like, I think it's about 15,000 tumors from public data sets. And so we're processing this stuff on a massive supercomputer. We have a top 200 supercomputer here at Clemson, but we've actually kind of outgrown that. We're using a lot of cloud-based systems to be able to do stuff. But in my lab, you have to know Linux, being able to program and be able to run workflows at the terascale, if not petascale, for some of my students to get by. And we're at a dawn in biology of everybody having a DNA sequencer. I always think like CVS might have a DNA sequencer to sequence my genome.
Wow.
Then and there to help me with my dosing, of verify what the doctor prescribed me to give me the right dose of medication. And to do all that, you know, we have to have massive networks and computational systems to process data very quickly. And that's what I teach my students. And I'm trying through Praxis to scale this out, really trying to get PhD level training into the hands of undergrads. And I'd love to dig down into the high school level, which we're actually trying to do right now with some of the people that are test driving our system.
That's fantastic. Yeah, the idea, and again, now we're talking about scale, and that's, you know, again, you're piloting it at Clemson, but the idea is, you know, if this concept of AI-powered curation and data-intensive computing in this learning experience platform, if that, you know, can scale, because there's only a few people in the past, you know, your classes have been small, right? I mean, you've had 5 or 10 people because it was so kind of one-on-one, but now this class is 2 or 3 times the size of a normal class because you have this asynchronous kind of scalable solution, correct?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I taught this class without the platform last spring. I called it biomedical informatics. A lot of the content here was what I did back then. But so when I have my bioinformatics class, it's a theory-based course, and there's no labs. But so this is an attempt to take this class that I piloted and make it a lab for my entire class of about 125 students. I only took a subset of the honors and grad students in the class right now to really test drive it. But what was really interesting to me is that I was able to go from like the 10 students I normally teach the stuff to 25, just to give it a place to stop. But when I announced the class that the subset of the class has to take this extra course to learn Python, I think I had like 10 students, maybe 12. Now I've got 25 because they know they need these skills. They all came to me and said, I'm doing this stuff in my lab. I don't know how to do it. So I let more people into the course. So there's a tremendous demand of kids that I don't even know that are coming into want to learn this stuff. They know they have to for jobs.
Exactly. So this is how it looks. So, you know, if you click on a skill and then you come into this carousel concept that I've been using, there are some manually curated content. So there's, you know, some videos, Alex, that you've recorded for the students. There's some labs that they go into the Praxis cloud, you know, to do some Kubernetes and other kinds of activities, experiential activities. There's discussion, so you're fostering that kind of interaction between the learners. And then there's AI resources, and I think there's 2 or 3 in each skill, which are then, you know, revolving and updating. Here's one, for example, the system went out and found the top 5 free courses to learn Linux commands from dzone. And the idea, I think, if you could just kind of walk us through the process, I mean, you kind of determined what the keywords are in each of the skills and the trusted sources, and then the system took over from there.
Yeah, just to give it a little bit of chronology too. So first of all, this is kind of hot off the presses. So we opened up the course a couple of weeks ago, and David and I have been developing it for a few months. But when I did this, I had to go and think about what I usually do, like a PowerPoint slide to get things started, and the content that I do in a classroom. Well, first of all, I built this. The entire thing is built around doing data intensive computing on real computing systems and using large data sets. So you actually have to have a Linux terminal to be able to do any of this work. But so wrapping around that, getting people to the terminal so they can do lab stuff like download the human genome, process it in some way. I had to find content that I usually like kind of do dynamically with my students based upon where they're at. So it was challenging to go and find resources from a manual curation perspective. I learned a lot about actually how bad some of the content is for things that I don't normally point students to. So I found some good content, and then this AI component to it, this discovery process, just blew me away. This is even possible. And we've been going through the process of getting keywords was more of like how I normally found the curated content. I use those trusted websites, and also, the keywords that make sense to me because I know how to search for stuff pretty well. And I was shocked at the content as it came back of things like, oh, I got to read that. Like it was amazing that how well it socketed things in, and it's still I'm on a learning curve to see how I want to stabilize some of these discovered content, and keep them into the, merge them in with the manually curated stuff. But I was shocked at how well it worked. After, actually, I should say this, that I would give a few keywords for some of the skills, and we would get very bad content back. And David would say, like, well, we need more sites, we need more keywords, make it better. So I would go and get more things. And then it was amazing how, like, there was like a critical mass of content coming in. And so I didn't realize, like, my brain doesn't know, like, the threshold of searching the internet to find the content, but the AI platform did. So I'm learning about this as we go along. It's really exciting to me.
And then this is where, kind of once we've configured the environment, you can come in and continually update it. And I think that's the trial and error, that involves the human interaction is, the system would return a bunch of things. You'd look at them, you can downvote them or delete them. The system learns every time you delete a piece of content. Okay, maybe, there's something about that content that Professor Feltus didn't like. And as we expanded the trusted sources, refined the keywords, we came up with the right kind of mix. Once that mix is in place, then the crowdsourcing, helps elevate the right content, because for every one piece of content in the carousel, there's probably 10 pieces of content that are below the carousel that didn't quite make the cut. Learners do have access to that content on an optional basis, but most learners are so they're so tough on time. They have so little time that they're just going to focus on what's in the carousel, and that's our job. Our job is to put the best stuff in the carousel so they don't have to go scour the optional resources.
Yeah, and to add to that too, so like what I teach a lot of Ph.D. students, and my goal is to get a student to be able to become a collaborator with me. So I'm training people to be able to train me, and that's what the process of becoming experts, right? Expert people to do science. But so when a lot of the students, I notice they go and do keyword searches in Google and they find stuff, and sometimes students like cut and paste really bad content into answers, and it's kind of like really bad, and I have to tell them you can't do that and everything, but they're not experts. And so what's really going to be exciting to me is see as they progress through the course, as they become experts. And the idea of the course is to get somebody with a real expert skill at the end of the day, stuff they could put on their resumes. That will they start to curate things, and what about the possibility of the students really coming up with new trusted sources and feeding back into the system. But I realize that you always have to have that expert seed layer to be able to start the process, but the students aren't there at the beginning of the course, but as they get further down the path, I think that they will be experts, and I think they'll feed forward the process.
Yeah, and the learners do, in the crowdsourcing, part of the environment, if we go back here, learners do have the ability to rate resources. They can make comments, they can like them, they can share them, they can add them to a playlist, they can interact with each other and the content. And as they do that, as they're becoming more expert, the system is getting smarter, and it's starting to understand, okay, wow, this was a resource that people really engaged with. What is it about this resource that, I can leverage as a machine and go off and find other content like this? And we also keep track of how well the learner is doing, and we give, again, like we talked about, a higher rating to those that are doing better, because clearly they're benefiting from the content. So this is that, kind of that nirvana that you and I talked about, Alex, where, the legacy is the expert sets up the system and then walks away. And this course could be, it could be there 10 years from now, right? Without, with very little interaction from you, and still be just as valuable.
Yeah, and like I think about it this way. This is a nerd alert, but the Vulcan Academy probably had this component too.
Yeah,
in the early days when they were developing it.
I'm sure they did. And on that note, there had to be, we've got our Ex Machina there. We had to have a Vulcan reference as well, because a lot of this is science fiction. I mean, I think, to a certain degree, we're starting to toy around with science fiction at this point, but it's exciting, and we appreciate your collaboration, and continue to watch your course very carefully and see how we can improve things. So I see a lot of chats. I don't know, you've been kind of curating that, Peyton. Are there any kind of questions that we should address before we end today?
One was from Mitchell about the topic of quality. And so he says, curious to hear from Alex, what was the quality and percentage of resources that were discovered by the AI curation that were not previously known to you?
That's an excellent question. Again, I'm on the learning curve with this, right? And so I found that it was difficult for me without AI, right? Like my own brain, to find the content for some things that I didn't normally, that I kind of already know, I take for granted, I guess, to find, even with some basic Linux concepts, to find really good content for it. So I was really surprised when I got the right mix of keywords and trusted sources, that it was putting back things that I could have chosen, but I didn't find. So it's helping me like really filter out a lot of the noise, I think, for good content. And so, and that again, that's the expert choosing it, but I'm surprised how well it worked.
And I do think that quality, that's a great point, Mitchell. Quality is a big deal, and that's where, the human intervention, and just kind of going back to this slide, you have the ability as the curator to go in and see the content that's being returned by the system and tell it this is not of good enough quality. And then the system will not only eliminate that resource, but also learn, to not deliver those kinds of resources again in the future. And so that's, quality at the end of the day, as Alex just said, is job one, and trying to separate the wheat from the chaff is the priority here.
Great. And Karen Quinton just asked, how do you maintain adherence to a curriculum if the content is driven by the reaction of the audience?
Great question. That's the old informal versus formal. And wow, that is a super important question. Let me go back to this slide. So at the end of the day, the learning only has value if the outcomes are tied to some sort of, goal or result, right? So we're not, none of us, I don't think, are in the business of just learning for learning's sake, right? So in Alex's case, these people need to learn specific skills for computational biology, and in a corporate sense, you have specific curriculum, and there has to be a specific set of skills that your organization needs, and you need to tie the curriculum to that. So that's why we try and make sure that whatever curation is happening, it's happening within the scaffolding of this kind of skills architecture and the learning path. And so we said, or Alex said, because I don't know a lot about transcribing DNA into RNA with Python, but Alex said, okay, these are the specific skills that we need, and we're going to make sure that through these types of resources, quizzes and discussions and and AI content, that our people are learning, that our learners or our students are learning these specific skills. So we're almost boxing in the AI by making sure it ties to a specific competency and outcome and skill. And so I wrote an article once about, kind of the perceived freedom associated with informal learning, but really the best learning is done when people perceive that they have freedom to learn whatever they want, but in reality, they're learning within the scaffolding of an organizational structure, whether that organization is a university or a company. So that's a great question. This is not a free-for-all.
And David, Stephen already addressed this question via the chat, but Jenny had a great question, kind of $1 million question. How does this work with content providers such as Skillsoft, Cybrary, and Udemy?
Exactly. So that's a great question too. And I think, right now we're in the process, Toolware and Anders Pink, of building some APIs with those specific providers and others, so that we can in fact import the content from those, I call them, I think, proprietary, resource libraries, Skillsoft, Pluralsight, Udemy, etc. The idea is, content is not just articles or blogs on the internet. It should be anything that somebody could consume to learn. And so we just need to make sure that the metadata is there and that we can get access to, the metadata associated with the resources. We can, in some cases, we can dive into the transcripts of a given video to identify key elements or words that are used in the video, and then access that resource. And then from a security perspective, the API, there's an owner a licensor who has licensed the content from one of those libraries, and then the audience is limited to those who are within the license. So it's a tricky proposition, but technically it's actually not hard. It's just getting cooperation from the libraries and the customers, and it's starting to happen. So that's a good question.
And there's another really interesting topic, just kind of about how does this impact the university of the future and in the next 20 years? And so in my mind, David, this kind of calls into question, there's content, but as a course designer, what are some of maybe you could speak to some of the other elements that are part of the course that, that are part of this environment?
Yeah, well, I would hand that off to Alex about the textbook of the future. I mean, Alex, your course is basically made up of, some lab work, some resources in this platform, some discussion, right? I mean, those are the main components of the course.
Yeah, definitely. So it's really it's a lab, and so you need to learn this machine shop skills of Python and Linux to be able to do anything with those tools, and it's applied really to genomics. And so the genome is something that's like, I mean, I watched it get turned on when I was a postdoc, like almost 20 years ago, and then watched the data fill up on top of the reference human genome for every disease, every evolutionary content, all this stuff. And so what is like, you need to be able to watch, the data is changing constantly and building up in size, and you need the tools to access information from the data. And I like textbooks if it's a stable thing, but our understanding of like human biology, it's not stable. And so you need tools to be able to track that dynamic accumulation of data. That's what I'm trying to do with this. So I see 20 years from now, like with biology, nobody teaches a textbook. They just go show you data sets and show you how to extract information out of them. So they don't take things out of context. And so that's my dream. And another thing with that too, I think is really important, is that interdisciplinary skills are critical. Everybody talks about them, but you have to actually implement them. And this is a way to do that, because really, like, there's computer science, a little bit of computer science. There's a lot of cyber infrastructure, computing systems, biology, all mixed together. And some of these skills are foundational for other fields too, beyond biology. I work with a lot of people outside of biology too. And so like that interdisciplinary thing, if we can make that happen, the world is going to change rapidly if people start accessing data across disciplines like that. So this is really an interdisciplinary, cross-curriculum, cross-departmental textbook that nobody will allow me to have in the current way that universities are structured. It's almost impossible to build this kind of curricula.
And I think that, so the role of the text, we talked about the role of the textbook and the content, but also the professor, there's a mentoring feature. in the platform that you're using. There's, you can share the lab with someone remotely. There's discussion that occurs between the learners. So the role of the professor is also changing to someone who becomes kind of the initial curator, and then ultimately you're kind of there to provide support and mentoring as the learners go through the experience.
Yes, and if the students like the content that I'm creating as a professor, this is a way to get it outside of my university walls, and other people can access it.
Yep.
And if I'm not good at it, maybe another professor is, right? There's competition for teaching out there that doesn't exist beyond the university walls.
Alex, to what degree are soft skills and communication skills among the skills that you're trying to impress on your students?
That's a fantastic question. So two things come to mind. One is you're learning the skills, I don't know what you want to call them, of troubleshooting, like how you get help from other people. Like I teach people how to ask for help when they get error messages. The concept of just Googling an error message, sending help tickets into the right people, those kind of skills, and knowing when to ask, but after you've given it a shot, like those are really important. But the communication skills here, I guess, is another nerd alert, is learning how to communicate in programming languages. In Python, they're very accessible to lots of people. Somebody said this is for PhD students. I think this goes down to the high school level of communicating with Python. I see this of everybody. Lots of people, if they want data science or even just dealing with the financial department and organizations, they need some coding skills. Excel breaks. Excel has kept us alive for a long time, but it breaks on a data intensive computing scale. And so that's what this is like being able to talk to each other with code in Python on large data sets, but also getting help from each other, the students within the platform through discussion boards and things like that, but being able to reach out to the world and getting help where the content, didn't cover, like the exceptions, the problems that arose.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that. I think we're just now coming up on the hour. Thank you, everybody, and especially Stephen and Alex. Really appreciate your perspectives on this and love the interaction from the audience. Let's keep the dialogue going. LinkedIn is a good place. You have our email addresses here. If you're interested in seeing this course firsthand, let us know, and we can get you potentially some evaluation accounts. And good luck with Curation. We're excited to see where this goes.
Thanks so much, everybody. Great to be part of it today. Thanks for all the engagement in the chat as well.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks,
everyone.